Welcome back to our fundamentals course, and in this lesson we'll be exploring the piano roll as well as ways to make music at a faster pace so that we can fail quickly to find out what works faster. If you're ready, let's jump right in. To start, make sure that you opened up the beat that we made last time, which we titled Miriam First Beat. While you don't need to be making a beat along with me to understand these concepts, it does help to solidify what you're learning. Now, let's open up the channel rack and select the clap channel. With that done, we'll use the shortcut Function or Control, depending on whether you're a Mac or PC user, plus F7 to open up the piano roll. Before we get into anything, let's set up the piano roll to be as useful to us as possible. Let's click on the little triangle in the top left corner of the piano roll, which opens up its menu. Go to Helpers and ensure that Note Grid Highlights, Note Length and Note Properties, and Ghost Channels are all checked off. Then we'll go into Scale Highlighting and make sure that we're in the key of a root note C and major. With this done, we're going to go back to the menu, go to View, and ensure that we have the, there it is, key labels, all notes selected. So let's explain what we actually just did there. Note grid highlights ensure that the notes on the piano roll grid are alternatingly highlighted. This helps you see exactly where you're placing your notes. Note length and note properties displays the length of the notes in the piano roll properties editor right down here. This editor is actually very similar to the graph editor that we had back in the channel rack, but we'll go into greater detail on that later. Next, the ghost channels allow the notes from other instruments to be slightly visible when we're working in a certain piano roll. This means that we're going to be able to see what notes we put on different channels so that we can align the notes for other channels to those. This helps us both stay in key and make a song that sounds good together. Finally, the scale highlighting option means that the scale we're working in is highlighted on the grid. And this is especially useful if we're trying to write a song in a single key, because we can see exactly where we can put our notes. This will help us a lot in writing melodies down the road. Just by taking a look at the piano roll, we can see that each horizontal row signifies a note in a space of time, while each vertical column is a place that that note can occupy. Here, along the top of the piano roll window, are buttons to access its different tools. While each of these tools has its own function, we're going to use shortcuts to make your production faster and render most of the buttons themselves useless. First, most important, your best friend, the Draw tool. So to access the Draw tool, we can click right here on this little pencil icon. This tool, like most of the piano roll's tools, is pretty self-explanatory if you pay attention to its name. By clicking in the piano roll grid with the Draw tool, a note is drawn and played through your speakers. This note can then be moved and extended or shrunk by clicking and dragging on it. So here we're going to extend it, and then as we move it, we can hear it being played. The Paint tool is very similar to the Draw tool. Its button is located next to it, and by clicking on it, or by pressing B on our keyboard, we can activate it. The chief difference between these tools is that with the Paint tool, if you left-click and drag, you'll draw multiple instances of a single note. Let's say that we wanted to actually draw notes, but across different notes themselves in a scale. We would have to hold down Shift and then use the same left-click and drag functionality. Now the notes would move to wherever we drag them. The next tool that we have is the Drum Sequence Paint tool, which we're not going to get into right now. Next to that, however, is the Delete tool, which is fairly self-explanatory. Using it allows the user to delete notes in the piano roll by left-clicking or left-clicking and dragging. The only difference between the Delete tool and right-clicking on any other tool to delete is, well, nothing. The Delete tool is only really helpful if you don't enjoy right-clicking and you have to delete a lot of notes at once. Next up, we have the Mute tool. The Mute tool can be activated like all of the other tools by clicking on it, and also like all of the other tools, it's fairly self-explanatory. So if we have the Mute tool activated and we left-click on a note, then it's muted. Left-click again, and it's unmuted. This functionality is extra helpful because sometimes notes or clips that we put into the piano roll or playlist are automatically muted. So to make it such that we can hear them, we would use the Mute tool. Next up, we have the Slice tool, which allows us to chop notes in the piano roll. Again, we'll select it by pressing it. To use the Slice tool, we left-click and drag to chop a note at any given point. However, if we want to be a little more precise with the Slice tool, we would hold down Shift and drag, which means that it would stay at a 90-degree angle and give us a much clearer picture of exactly where a note is going to be cut. Next up, we have the Select tool. The Select tool is extremely useful. When we have this tool armed, we can left-click and drag over notes to select them, which means that we can then edit them together, like stretching them, copying them, shifting them up or down an octave, or moving them through time. Usually we use this tool by left-clicking and dragging over all of the notes we want, but if we hold Shift and click over specific notes, then we can highlight them one at a time. The Draw tool offers most of the functionality of the other tools if you know the correct shortcuts. Let's begin with the Delete tool. If you right-click while within the Draw tool, you can delete a note. Then, if we want to use the Slice tool, we would hold Alt, Shift, and left-click over a note to precisely cut it, just like the Slice tool. Then, we can use the Zoom functionality by either scrolling with our mouse to go to a new place in the piano roll, holding down Command or Control and scrolling to zoom horizontally, or lastly, using this little button right here to zoom vertically. Moving beyond tools and shortcuts, the piano roll offers other functionality for making and editing notes. Let's walk through a brief demonstration to understand its tools and its functionality better. Close out of the piano roll using the F7 shortcut, and now let's mute all of the channels that are drum samples by clicking here on the left. Next, we're going to click this plus icon on the channel rack, and we're going to add in FL Keys, which opens up a piano VST. Remember, that stands for Virtual Studio Technology. Now, with the FL Keys channel selected, we're going to right-click on it and pull up its piano roll. With the piano roll open, let's paint in a major C chord starting on C5. There's our first note. We'll extend it over here to the second bar. Then we'll draw in an E, and then lastly we'll draw in a G. These three notes together make up a major C chord. We'll discuss this in greater detail in another lesson, but for now, let's just think of notes played all at once together being chords. Before we go any further, let's go over some extremely useful ways to manipulate notes within the piano roll. Making sure that we have the Draw tool engaged, we're going to select all of the notes using our Control or Command plus left-click and drag shortcut. And now if we wanted to move them all together, we would simply left-click and drag on any one note. This is very helpful for moving large quantities of data all at once. Now, let's say that instead we wanted to finely move them instead of with just our mouse. We would hold Shift and use the arrow keys to move them according to our snap to grid settings. Additionally, if we wanted to duplicate these notes, we would hold down the Shift button, left-click, and drag to make a whole new instance of them. This is incredibly helpful when we're making new chords to go with one another, as we can take a similar pattern and move it throughout the piano roll. Lastly, if we wanted to move an entire note selection, or even a single note up or down an octave, we would hold down the Control or Command button and use the up and down arrow keys to quickly move it between octaves. Now we're going to demonstrate an important topic called quantization. Quantization is the process of aligning notes so that they are more on beat. Remember that we usually don't want a perfectly timed song because that would sound inhuman and lose soul. But we do want our song to be in time so that it sounds even and pleasing to the ear. So, to demonstrate, let's make sure that our snap to grid settings are set to none. Let's do the same in the main snap settings. With this done, let's go back to the C chord and mess around with it a little. Let's left click and drag the G chord to be slightly further than the edge of our C chord and extend the E chord to about halfway through the second bar. Let's play this to see what it sounds like. Because we're on pattern mode, we're not going any further, but we know that this G and E will extend beyond the point that we would want them to if we were to play this within a song. To fix the fact that our pattern mode won't play beyond this first bar, we're going to minimize the piano roll, head over to the channel rack, and increase the number of steps that we put in each pattern. Let's put this up to 32 to double the length of our pattern from 1 bar to 2 bars. Now we can return to our piano roll for FL keys. Back in the piano roll, now that we've extended the length of our patterns, we can hit play and hear the note data that's contained in 2 bars. Hear how that C note stops being played before the E or G notes? We're going to fix that now with quantization. We're going to clean this up using both quantizing and slicing, but first we're going to quantize. Let's start off by going to our snap to grid settings and choose half step. Not only does this mean that by dragging notes they'll move in increments of a half step, but it also means that our quantization will be aligned with half steps. To initiate quantizing, we can press Alt plus Q, and we will end up quantizing the entire piano roll. Now my quantizer didn't show up immediately because I'm currently working on two screens, but if you're working on one, you should see this window pop up as soon as you hit that shortcut, Alt plus Q. Now the quantizer has many different capabilities, but today we're only concerned with two parameters. Those parameters are the quantizer start time, which determines how much of the original placement of the note, where it began to be played, will be blended with the fully quantized version of the note's beginning, the place that the note would snap to if it was perfectly in time, according to the snap settings that we chose. If the start time dial is full, then the note will be fully quantized. We want a mixture, so it's best to leave it at half. Secondly, we want to make sure that the drop-down menu next to the duration now reads Quantize End Time. This will allow us to quantize the end of our notes as well and put those in better time. Let's accept this quantization and look at the notes. Now, the G and E note should be closer to the grid line. This is helpful for correcting errors in music that you may have accidentally made, especially when playing on a MIDI controller. That being said, two of our notes still extend beyond the place that we want them to finish playing. We're going to fix that by using the Slice tool. Let's pull out the Slice tool up here, hold down Shift, and drag down to make sure that we've got exactly what we're looking for. Looks about right. Let's release. If we return to the Draw tool by pressing P on our keyboard, we can delete these cutoff ends of the notes by holding down the right click on the mouse and dragging. The last thing that we want to go over here in the piano roll is the event editor. This window should be at the bottom of your piano roll window, but if you cannot see it, then click on the tiny dots and drag upward to reveal it. This graph is similar to the graph editor that we already learned about in the channel rack, with all of the same functionality. The main difference here is that you can see the individual notes a bit better, and you have better control over the effects that you can put in place. That being said, over time, this space can get very crowded, especially if ghost channels are on. Well, that wraps it up for this lesson, and next time we'll be looking at the playlist, which is used for arranging and organizing patterns into songs. Be sure to save this new version of our project, Miriam First Beat, and this is Miriam Music, signing off.